Hey folks, Tim Miller here, and I am excited about today's time with you. Many of you guys know that, Lionheart's all about equipping you with practical skills. And, in these days, I think we all would agree they are desperately needed. And I am honored today to have my dear friend, Chris Anderson, with us today. I'm going to let Chris tell you a little bit about himself in a second, but he's a counselor. And he is someone who comes alongside of people that are dealing with stuff. And oh, by the way, I think that's you and I. We're all
Yeah,
dealing
I'm a
with.
professional stuff dealer.
That's exactly right. But folks, I don't have to underscore the importance of and what this is about is staying sane in an insane world, because it just seems like every day there's another level of violence. Just this week, we had a what I would say mentally struggling person in White Settlement, Texas. Does that ring a bell? That was armed to the teeth, explosives in a van and targeting. Here we go, a church. And then we had another situation in Sacramento, California, outside, where a Christian school was targeted by a madman. Now, this madman shot two kindergarten kids. And, the tragedy to all of this is that when you and I hear this, and we're not even talking about Ukraine, the Middle East, October 7th, we're not talking about that stuff. It seems like it piles up every day.
Mhm.
And one of the things I've noticed in my life is that when you're flooded with social media, because you're getting stuff real time, you have to process that. And I know from Chris, you're the expert, and I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions here in a second.
I am ready for you, Tim.
But I know in my military and my law enforcement career, staying sane when things are insane is difficult. And so I hope and pray that you guys listening today benefit as much as I have from just knowing Chris, hearing his wisdom. But let me really stress, folks, this is really important stuff, because how you process the stuff in our lives is really going to determine the quality of your relationships, your ability to perform. And oh, by the way, and those of you who have heard me talk before on this channel, the research has clearly shown that in the midst of a crisis, 90% of the skills that you need are right here. Their psychological skills. So we are honored today to have Chris. Chris, I really appreciate. I know you're running hard, and oh, by the way, Chris is basking in the glory of, what'd you say, 18 inches of
About 18
snow?
inches of snow in my backyard right now. Yeah, I live near the Great Lakes. I'm certain, well, probably some of your viewers and listeners probably live in the area too. But it's this time of year, Lake Erie doesn't like us too much. We got dumped on by Lake Erie, and
Yeah, and to my audience, I shared the pain because it dropped all the way down to 70
yeah, we should keep
here.
you in prayer.
Yeah,
That's rough.
somebody has to suffer, and I
Somebody
chose to do it here. But
suffering for the Lord there in Florida. I get it.
that's exactly right. Chris, just if you would tell
Hmm.
everybody just a little bit about yourself. We met through the training that we do with Lionheart. Chris is a warrior. He wants to be prepared. He's developing his tactical skills,
Hmm.
and but we connected way beyond that. So, Chris, tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Sure, Tim. I think you and I actually first met on one of Chuck Holton, who's a mutual friend,
That's
one of
right.
his podcasts, and it was good to be part of that. And I was obviously when the training came up, Lionheart to do the tactical training this past back in May. I was really excited to be able to be part of that. I am a licensed mental health counselor here in New York State, and I've also in previous positions in my life, I was more before I started my own office here, I was the director of counseling and health services at a local university. So I worked quite a bit, obviously, with college students and helped them to understand the transitions in life. And of course, watching what's going on in our university settings and just what they're getting fed now was just really difficult for me to operate in that setting as a believer and as somebody who really could see that the damage that some of these progressive ideologies are having on our young people. And so during a pandemic, I decided to leave the university and open up my own office. And I had a lot of people saying, wait, you're going to leave a good job like this to strike out on your own? And I said, I need to be able to operate more with who I am and the truth that I know. And so I opened up this office, and I'm busy. I have to do it all. I'm only working on my own. I don't have any anybody working with me. So I do all the insurance billing, and it's difficult to keep up. And then I also have my beautiful wife Angela and my two young boys, 5-year-old and 3-year-olds, and they're out helping me to shovel the driveway this morning. So I sent Tim a picture of my boys this morning. Up to their knees in snow, or up to their waist actually. And then Tim sent me back his picture here of him sitting next to the pool down there in Florida. So we got to compare a little bit there. So
Yeah, we had to keep things balanced.
yeah,
Chris. I mean, that was the issue.
that's
But
right.
Chris, thank you for the work that you're doing. I don't believe there's any more important work that can be done than to help people navigate how to stay balanced, how to stay, and whether you're a person of faith or not of faith.
Mm-hmm.
There are practical skills that we all need to cope. The news has been consumed with a public assassination in New
Mm-hmm.
York, the last couple of days, and a CEO being gunned down, and some of that, I was thinking, okay, well, how am I going to talk about that in terms of staying safe on the streets, which we do, but also the impact of that
Mm-hmm.
violence to family and really to the rest of the country. It's pretty raw when you watch a public execution happen right in front of your
Absolutely.
eyes on
And it's so
video.
easy to see that footage too, because we all walk around now with a video camera and right in our pockets. And the first thing sadly, when people see events like this happening, they, instead of asking, what do I need to do to keep myself safe and more my family that might be around me, you see so many people reaching for, they want to get that next video clip that might give them 15 minutes of fame and glory. So it's just really, and so that really is a major development, in the past few decades here. It's so quick, so easy to see these videos that really then stick with us in our.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really a good point, Chris, because it's kind of everywhere, isn't it? I
Mhm.
mean, it's out in small town USA and large town, but there are a lot of our folks are older, some are younger, and I just wonder, as a person who's seeing the
Mhm.
issues come to you every day, and how people are processing, and mental health issues, and PTSD issues, which are on the rise. Chris, talk to us about 5 things. I know we talked about 5 things because that's just,
Mhm.
something we could put in our brain. But what are some principles that all of us can use really to stay grounded? How do you help people stay sane, really, in a
Sure.
growingly insane world?
Yeah. One of the big things that continually comes up in not only my practice, but I also speak every other week on our local Christian radio network here in Western New York, Central New York, and Northern Pennsylvania, is that the need to have a healthy support system in place. Okay. Because what that does is it then cuts down on our tendency to isolate when things get difficult. Okay. And as we saw during COVID, despite all the ways of connecting electronically, isolation really went up tremendously when we were all locked in our houses and couldn't go out and move about freely. And, that had a tremendous impact on every demographic. Okay, every demographic, especially the younger people. But having a strong, well, first of all, let me distinguish between isolation and just taking some time of solitude too. Okay, so for example, I some days I'm working with upwards of 9 clients in one day, up to an hour apiece. And there are times when, okay, I need to just step back and be by myself, not talking to anybody, and just breathe and maybe pray to God and just allow, just, go out in nature, or just take a walk around the block or something, just get rid of what's going on in my own mind. Okay? So times of solitude are fine. The problem is this: when we become increasingly anxious in social situations, now that social anxiety causes us to seek out more time by ourselves. And now what we're doing is we're now isolating it to avoid, not taking time by ourselves to just de-stress and kind of unwind so that we're actually keeping ourselves healthier emotionally, spiritually, mentally. But now what we're doing is we're actually worsening those conditions by avoiding, and that's not good. So isolation is different. It's kind of like the evil twin of taking time to ourselves. Okay, because taking that time of solitude to just take better care of ourselves is a directed activity that has a positive outcome. isolation is not a directed activity. Isolation is an avoidance that actually worsens our mental health, our spiritual health, and ultimately our social health and our relational health as well.
That's really profound, because I hadn't looked at isolation through the lens of too much of it is not good. And we
Right.
have to be active in combating that. And now, what would you say to the older people that maybe they don't have that support group anymore?
Yeah.
How do you encourage your clients to get a support group?
Well, I don't work with a ton of older folks.
Hmm.
I have a couple, but if I'm going to specifically address the older folks, I think I almost I almost need to address the younger folks who should be mindful of checking in on the folks who are
Oh,
elderly, okay? Because the elderly are folks that might not be able to get out or that might be in nursing home facilities. They don't necessarily have the ability to address this proactively.
good point.
They depend on their families or others, especially, come on, churches, I'm calling on you right now. Churches, have a ministry to folks that are shut in. Have a ministry, knowing where your folks in your communities are that can't necessarily connect in person, and get folks to volunteer to go reach out to those folks in person once or twice a week or whatever, more often if you can, because you'll see that when you do visit folks in those facilities, their faces light up because they recognize how valuable that is.
Wow,
So,
that's so
so
good.
Yes,
Yeah.
we got to address the younger folks that have the ability to go check in on the elderly instead of addressing the elderly themselves because they may not have the ability to do that on their own.
That's so good, Chris. And I guess, get out of your comfort zone and go help care for others. That's really good. So
Absolutely.
support systems are huge. Give me
Yeah.
another one.
And let me, before we get to the other, let me make one more point on the support systems. As best as you can, do it in person, okay? And getting back to what I said earlier about COVID, electronically, connecting through social media or podcasts or whatever is fine to a certain point. It's not the same. And in my own office here, I try to encourage folks to come in person. I do offer online counseling for, like, I've got clients not far from New York City and Albany, which are, those are on the other side of New York State. But try to socialize and get your social support network in person. It really is, it is actually better than doing it online.
That's great. Great point too, because it's kind of like going to church. You can go to church online or you can be there. Two very different experiences when you're
Exactly.
shaking hands. That's really good.
Yeah.
Awesome. What? Give
Yeah.
me another one.
Give me another one. Okay, kind of going along with the electronic online connection is you really want to honestly evaluate the impact that your online screen time, social media presence is having in all areas of your life. Okay, so the evidence, Tim, is mounting, and it's becoming increasingly clear that our all areas of our life, spiritual, relational, our physical and mental health areas, are all being impacted by the amount of time that people are staring at screens.
Wow.
And so you have to it's out of control. It's out of control. So you have to ask yourself, how has my life in every area been impacted by social media and online activities? Okay. All the stats are showing this giant increase in, let's say, ADHD in children and in adults too. But the reality is, and this stat came out years ago, Tim, that the average amount of time when the internet really got popular, the amount of time that anybody was spending on any particular web page was only about 8 seconds. And that's because what happens is people get online and they want to read quick blurbs, and then they click to something else, and then they click to something else and something else. But what we've done is we've trained our brains to not be able to focus for any significant periods of time. So it's not necessarily the ADHD and similar types of mental health disorders or brain disorders are they're increasing not necessarily because of organic reasons or any chemical imbalances or anything like that. They're increasing because we're training our brains to not be able to focus for very long. Okay, so understanding that dynamic can not only help you as a person, but it can also help you to understand the impact that the screen time is having on your school age children as well.
That
Okay,
is
so
so good.
yeah, and to go along with that, Tim, I would encourage folks to consider, with the new year coming up, doing a 30-day fast from screen time. And don't, and you'll have to kind of pre-plan this out. You'll have to understand that you're going to need to substitute in activities instead of screen time activities. Have some books ready. Have some, like, maybe a to-do list of activities that you can do around the house. Get games out for your family. Go visit people. Make actual phone calls where you have conversations with people. Okay, during those times, but also be ready that when you're going to notice some very, if you try to cut down on that screen time, you're going to notice withdrawal symptoms. Just like if you
Wow.
were addicted to drugs. As a matter of fact, they've done studies and there's videos you can actually watch online about when they've tried to take away screens from children. Just the rage that these children like go through, the rage that they have because there is an actual withdrawal that you experience when you cut down the screen time because you're so used to grabbing it and checking it, and especially if you have notifications that go off constantly on your phone, like you don't need to be notified every time some news story happens. Remember back in the Walter Cronkite era, is what I call it. 6 p.m., you got your local headlines. 6:30 p.m., you got your national news and international headlines. And then, those of you that are night owls might stay up until 11 p.m. to watch the news again. But the rest of us go to bed. And then we go several hours without having any more information fed into our brains. Those days are gone unless you're mindful to return to those days where you are in charge of how often you allow stuff into your brain. And that is key.
Hmm.
That is absolutely key.
Wow. I wish you'd quit preaching to me because I am so guilty of what you just said, especially getting, called, for news stories and that kind of stuff. It's so important. I was also thinking, Chris, and we've talked about that, the tactical, how, we preach this on the channel. If your face is in your phone, you can't see
You're
the
not
threats.
situationally aware.
That's right. But,
Yeah,
and now let's take that one step further. You're not seeing your kids suffering, the threats to them
right.
if our noses are constantly, wow, that's really, really important. I love the 30-day fast.
We are denying our children, or not only are, physically we might be in the room with them, but we're not there with them.
So
We are
true.
wherever our phone is on that screen, that's where our minds are. And I've seen other videos as well, and seen other people where they're just kind of pushing their kids away while they're on their phone and ignoring their children. The damage that's being done to those children at that moment cannot be underestimated.
Chris, that's so. I saw a real world example: a father, mother, two kids, all on their phones the whole time at a restaurant, and certainly they put them up to eat, and there was some interaction. But I thought one day when they're standing around their parents, caskets,
Hmm.
are we going to have robbed them of some incredible memories?
Right.
Because we just, got obsessed with the next story or the
Hmm.
next Facebook post. That's the thing that blows me away.
It's just,
We're
and you know
we're
what?
living.
These social, yeah,
Yeah,
these platforms understand that we're going to be. Look at that video. Look at that video.
that's
And
right.
if anybody has spent any significant amount of time, which probably we all have, on Facebook or Instagram or some of these other platforms, it's so easy to, you look at the clock and all of a sudden you realize I just spent an hour and 20 minutes mindlessly, that's the thing, mindlessly scrolling, where we're actually not in control of our actual thinking processes. We're letting that platform control our minds for that amount of time. That's doing significant damage. That's why a lot of people have ADHD and they can't focus and they can't concentrate. Now think about the schools. We have to, New York State is going to get rid of the state regents exams. These has been the hallmark of New York State education for as long as I can remember, and well before my time as well, where New York State's education was so strong that they had these state exams that if you had a New York State regents diploma, that was looked very highly on by secondary, higher level educational institutions because of how robust and how strong the New York State's getting rid of that because we no longer expect our children to be able to accomplish those things anymore. But sadly, we're not asking the right questions. We're not asking why should we get rid of these instead of bolstering what we're expecting of our kids. We're dropping that bar down so low that it's very frightening.
Well, and Chris, these two things alone, I'm thinking of if you're a parent or if you're a grandparent listening to this broadcast, you need to make sure that your kids listen to what Chris is saying. And as much as I love what we're doing on the tactical side and helping folks prepare on the tactical side, you may or may not ever be attacked in your life. My hope and prayer is that you're never attacked.
Mm-hmm.
If you are, I hope you're prepared. But let me tell you, folks, what Chris is speaking applies to every single person that's hearing this.
Hmm.
And this is not a plug for the channel. This is a fact. Every person in your family should listen to this. Do you have a support system? Number one. And if you don't, you need to get one.
Gonna get one.
Number two, are you evaluating your screen time? This is liquid gold, folks. If you can get your kids and grandkids disconnected or at least controlling this,
That's the key.
it's going to make a huge difference. And I hear parents actually explaining it away by saying, oh, technology, they need to be tech savvy. I agree, but you also need to safeguard the minds. And Chris, thanks for bringing that out. You're actually allowing your minds to be controlled by something other than you. That's so good. Two golden ones, brother. You're hitting it out of the park. What's the next one?
Well, this is just stuff that I'm having to work through all this in my own family, in my
Yes.
own life, and
Yeah.
I mean, come on, parents, I understand. I've got a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old boy who, I can only do so much. Because I still got dishes to wash and a house to clean, and up here in the tundra of New York State, I got to load wood, this time of year to throw into the wood fire. I mean,
Yep.
and it's tempting to just want to plop them in front of the television, or, they don't have their own screens, and I don't plan on allowing them to have their own phones or their own screens until they're able to buy them on their own and out on their own. I know that sounds extreme.
Yeah.
But extreme situations require extreme measures. That doesn't mean that they're not going to be on the phone or like on the computer at some point. Of course, in school they will be, but I'm talking about the time when they're not directly engaged in learning activities. I don't want the screens to be a babysitter. Okay.
Yeah.
Because then the same thing is happening to them that's happening to adults, and that is we're letting that screen control what's going into their minds.
Yeah, it's interesting, Chris. I just did an interview with Sky News yesterday.
Okay.
And this topic came up. I was doing it on, some of the Secret Service stuff, but the topic came up about Australia.
Yes.
Is now looking at prohibiting kids
Mhm.
from accessing through their phones, the internet, because of online terrorist recruiting. These kids are being indoctrinated into this ideology of pure, pit of hell evil.
It's horrible.
And the Australian government's going, no, we're not sacrificing an entire generation,
Mhm.
to whatever's going on. And then, Chris, you're the expert, but the mental health statistics that come. I mean, one of the things we train, is mental health awareness, and the fact that unfortunately we're seeing teenagers kill themselves.
Not
On
just
social
teenagers,
media.
Tim.
Yeah.
It's younger than that. It's
Wow.
younger than that.
Amazing.
Well, here's the thing with that. I saw that. I saw what Australia was trying to do, and of course, I started to think about, okay, who ultimately needs to be in control of that? The government's doing it largely in response because parents aren't.
That's right.
As a parent, you are your child's most influential factor. We can't wait for the government to do it. I mean, that's
So
really
true.
the difference between, if we want to get political here for just a minute, between conservatism and liberalism, is that liberals, say, hey, we need the government to do everything for us. Conservatives are like, no, we need to do more.
That's
We
right.
need to be responsible for ourselves, for our children, for our communities. That don't wait for the government. I mean, they're trying to do that here in New York, Tim. Kathy Hochul is, and I'm not necessarily opposed to this at all. Kathy Hochul is a very liberal governor, but she's trying to pass a law that's going to prohibit cell phones in the classroom, and I'm all for that.
Mhm.
Because parents don't seem to get that. Parents are like, well, my kid should be able to call me. My child needs to be able to communicate. I'm like, well, if they need to get a hold of you, the office is where they can go make a phone call to get a hold of you. Or the office can come down and deliver a message to your child. Your child does not need a phone in the classroom. They have computers for learning purposes. Those phones are just absolutely distracting, and all that addictive behavior that we were talking about earlier, when you then pull that phone away from the child, sadly, I think what we're going to see is, if this measure passes in New York and other places, they're going to have a really hard time implementing it, but they have to. They
Yeah.
really have to see, listen, it's not good to let kids have these smartphones when they need to be focusing on their schoolwork.
Well, I think it's a win too, Chris, that you've described it as they're playing out addictive behavior in the classroom.
Yes.
And that's huge. I have never heard that before. That's very important to the argument, because if we're creating students becoming more addicted, then, that's even one more reason, to make sure, oh, by the way, maybe it's important you pay attention to the teachers.
And they're not addicted to learning. They're not
Yeah,
addicted to like their math lesson on that device. No,
right,
they're addicted to their social media, to
right.
this video gaming, which is just a whole other beast that we don't really have
Yeah,
time to get into. But I'll tell you what, that's another thing right there.
yeah,
That's what they're addicted to. So they're not like, parents aren't saying I couldn't get my child to get away from the mathematics app on their phone. No, they say I couldn't get my child to get away from social media.
good advice, Chris. All right, we got two
Okay.
down. Give me a third one.
Third one. This one is more of a general monitoring of how you're moving through all areas of your life. And if you think about boundaries, okay, a boundary. When we talk about a boundary, for example, you're driving down the interstate, and you see "Welcome to Florida." Okay, now you know that you're no longer in Georgia. You're now in Florida as you're on the interstate heading south. Boundaries basically are kind of, and we're talking about relationships, they're kind of a set of rules that you live your life by to help protect yourself in all different areas. For example, you need to have boundaries in your personal relationships. You need to have boundaries when it comes to work, even church activities. There can be too much of a good thing. All right. We're constantly being told that we need to get more involved in this and do more of this and do more of that. But the problem is this: too many good things, where does it end up taking away from? Our time with our own families. Okay.
Yeah, good point.
I have this conversation all the time with especially men in my church. We're talking about how busy we are. We don't have time for this, don't have time for that. And I said, why is it that we keep having these conversations, but nothing seems to be done about it? I look at sports for children, junior high and high school sports, and how, back when I was growing up, there was never any Sunday sports. It
Hmm.
was always done on Friday night or at some point on the day on Saturday. Sundays, they never had practices on Sundays, and they never, maybe there was an occasional tournament or something on a Sunday, but by and large, Sundays was still a family time where people recognized the need to have their kids at home, and even working on homework, having a day of the week for that. But your children, honestly, our children don't need to be in every single thing just because they like it or just because they want it. Okay. We have to prioritize. If we're going to say, and you'll hear this all the time, especially in churches and especially with folks who are more conservative in nature, that, sitting around that meal table together is so important. But of all the people I hear say that it's important, I don't think the numbers match of the people that actually make that happen in their lives, because they're so over involved in their children's lives. And what that also does is it takes away from husbands and wives having quality time together as
Well,
well.
that's huge.
So now the marriage is impacted.
Right.
The marriage is
That's
impacted.
huge.
Yeah. So we're just bombarded in all areas of our life. Think about the workplace. This is a huge one. Our workplace, I've got clients who are physicians, okay, who their marriages are in trouble because of, the hospitals or the universities that they work for are constantly demanding them to be on call more
So
often or
true.
pick up more, like a greater caseload. Again, where does that time come from? Just like money, we don't have a time tree growing in our backyard. We don't have money trees growing in our backyard. So we have to steal it from somewhere else. And so, this is why I think that they're even floating the idea of, in certain, I don't know if it's a nationwide initiative or just local state initiatives, of having a 4-day work week.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would have to give that more a thought to understand whether or not that would be good overall or not. But, considering it can't hurt.
Yeah.
But
That's
again,
for sure. Yeah.
are people willing to tell their boss or their employer, look, I can't be there at this time. My child has this. Okay. And I think we got to remember too that when we have to implement boundaries and really take a firm stand against being expected to do more, we got to really leave room for God to work in this, because God will honor that. God will honor us when we tell our employer, I've got to keep my family first in this. I'm not going to work that extra time. I can't do it.
Right.
I mean, that's going to be between you and God and your employer, but you got to consider the cost of not doing that, of allowing your time to be stolen. You got to consider the cost on your family.
I think it goes right back to your point too about, having guiding principles in place and that your family is going to be ahead of your work in terms of that guiding principle. And that's so important. In my background, the phone rings, you go.
Yeah,
And I can't tell you how many, through the years, how many birthdays I've missed, how many
yeah,
anniversaries I've missed on and on. And somebody very wise, another agent, looked at me and said, "That's your choice. You have to choose what really matters."
hmm,
And I thought that was the wisest counsel. I ended up transitioning to another role where I was home, and man, I still, am grateful. These are excellent. So we need a
yeah,
support system. Number one, we need
yes,
those around us that can cheer us on. We
hmm,
need to evaluate our social media time. That hits me right in the middle of the face. And
hmm,
that has to be an aggressive act. You have to look at it and go, what's valuable, what's not. The third thing is you've got to set boundaries in
hmm,
place. You have to decide what you will and won't do. We kind of talk about this in the training world. Whatever you repeat over and over again, muscle memory, that's what you're going to default to under stress. And I'm seeing that same parallel here. That is awesome. Give me number 4, brother. You're
okay,
rolling.
all right, bro. Number 4, this is definitely something that this is in your realm, but it really is in, the mental health and spiritual realm as well. Be aware of the rapidly changing dynamics in our society.
Wow.
Okay, and that kind of encapsulates everything we're talking about. But Tim, you and of course our mutual friend Chuck Holton, you guys do a fantastic job of this. Okay, and that's getting folks to understand that you got to know what's going on, but you have to have that information coming to you in a more controlled manner and a more truthful manner. Than you can't rely on the mainstream media any longer to provide truthful information. As we just, it's, you know, we're not in the Walter Cronkite era anymore, where you could pretty much rely on what you were hearing. Journalists took their job. Now there's more opinionism and editorialism than there is actual journal, like unobjective or objective journalism. It's just the nature of the beast is so different. And honestly, we're looking at this election and wondering what Trump is going to do, and as he's putting in his new cabinet, and depending on whether you wanted Trump in office or not, might determines how you're looking at the situation. But we're trying, I think a lot of us are hopeful that, hey, maybe we'll turn the corner a little bit on some of the dangers that we're seeing in our society. These horrendous defund the police movements, and here in New York State, they've got that bail reform where they're letting people out that should not be back on the streets.
Yeah.
And it's just awful. But that situational awareness that you talk about a lot on your podcasts, and just being aware, don't have your nose buried in your phone when you're walking down the street. And, be aware. Like, I'm sitting right now in my office building, okay, and I think there's one other person in the building right now, but I can hear when that front door opens.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking, okay, I know that my office itself is locked right now because there's no security here right now.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have to be continually thinking about that. And how does this played out in our daily lives? Form some or have some conversations with your neighbors. Know which neighbors, and this is all from Chuck Holton here, so I have to give him credit for some of this. What I'm saying now is, get to know your neighbors, know who they are, who are the like-minded individuals in your neighborhood. If you've got any elderly, as we talked about earlier, know where they are and talk to them and just say, hey, listen, you call me if you need anything. I will come down and if you need some help, so you don't feel like you're, especially here in the rural areas, okay?
Mhm.
And then, of course, and this can be very overwhelming for folks, is if this is overwhelming and you're not sure how you're doing or how you're feeling emotionally, get some help. Go talk to somebody.
It's good.
It could be a pastor, or it could be,
Yeah.
an elder in your church. It doesn't necessarily have to be a, professional that you pay, but don't process all this alone. And this goes back to our first point, Tim, and that is, have that support system in place. Okay. And definitely that situational awareness and being aware of the dynamics in your community is more acute right now in the urban areas than it is out here in the sticks. Okay. But
Yeah.
we know that, Chuck's pointed out that the rural areas aren't going to be immune to it, even if it takes more time for the rural areas to be more heavily impacted. Okay. But again, wherever you live, depending on whether you're inner city, suburbs, or rural, You have to be aware of your dynamics in your communities, and you keep an eye on your crime stats. Hey, reach out to the police. Every now and then I'll send a note of thanks and encouragement to our police stations here locally, because I've had to call for the police assistance in my office before. I have had people threatening me in my office where I had to get them here quickly. So they're aware of what I do for a living. They're aware that I am a solo practitioner. Okay, so whatever your circumstances are in your workplace or in your home, in your communities, be aware of it, be mindful of it, and have a plan. That preparation, have a plan of how you're going to handle these types of challenges if they come up.
Chris, that's so wise. And you're preaching the Lionheart gospel as well, because I know 10 years ago we would have said preppers are crazy. Now we say preppers, we are one, because, I can cite very quickly when you look at entire airline industry shut down just like that. You
Mm-hmm.
look at power grids targeted. You look at all kinds of folks coming into the country that hate us and want to do harm.
Mm-hmm.
To your point, we go up to the strategic level. Situational awareness is being aware of those threats and then planning appropriately. So that's just awesome. Great advice. So we're going to establish our support system.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to evaluate our screen time aggressively. I'm listening.
All of us, listen to him. It's
Yep.
all of us.
And we're putting boundaries for how we're going to live our life. And then we're going to be aware of how our culture and our society is changing around us, both at the tactical and the strategic level. And then what's your final one, brother?
The final one, I kind of lump three together, and that's monitor and take care of your sleep, your diet, and your exercise patterns.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, because these are areas that are going to impact your mental acuity, and of course your physical acuity and your overall health. When we get adequate amounts of sleep and we eat a good diet that has a lot of fresh vegetables and fruits in it, we're going to notice a decreased rate as well as duration of physical illnesses. Not to mention our emotional states will be in better condition as well. Okay, there's lots of information out there on the impact of having at least three times per week, up 20 minutes to a half an hour of rigorous cardiovascular exercise, the impact that has on physical health and also mental health. So, and that's going to position you better to deal with the stresses of life when your body is functioning better and your mind is functioning better and you're getting adequate sleep. Folks with young children know how important that is, because my kids still love in the middle of the night, if they get scared by something, come crawling to bed, and well, then they're flopping around like fish, keeping us up.
Right.
But
Yeah.
that's a season of life that I'm in right now. But overall, those are three big areas that we really need to focus on, again, that have an impact on all areas, including our ability to concentrate and to do our jobs better and relate to other people as well. So sleep, diet, and exercise are really huge. So that's kind of the icing on the cake right there.
Chris, I tell you, that's just profound at a number of levels. I find sometimes, even with some of the folks we train, I
Mm-hmm.
hear the words, well, I'm older or I'm not in shape, so I can't. I heard a guy say not too long ago, if you say I can or you say I can't, you're right.
But I will say this, though, too, especially for older folks or folks who are out of shape and haven't been exercising regularly. Of course, talk to your primary care provider first to
Right.
make sure that and then if they need to, they can kind of gradually ease you back into a more rigorous exercise workout. If you've been sedentary for a very long time, I mean, this is what I do for a living. I'm sitting all day talking to people. I have to make sure that I'm mindful to, fortunately, the gym that I belong to is a 2-minute walk from my office.
Wow.
So it's great. I can fit that in. And some days it's first thing in the morning. Other days it's lunch hour. Other days it's, right before I go home at night. All depends on my schedule for the day. But again, if you've been sedentary for a long time or you're very much out of shape, please talk to your doctor first. They may then refer you to an exercise trainer or something of that nature. But definitely be in the mindset of, like, you've said this before too on several of your podcasts. Hey, get yourself in shape so that if and when things fall apart, you can take better care of yourself. Chuck has said this too. He's carrying people. We've seen the videos of Chuck carrying people in the different war zones that he's in. And if he weren't in as good a shape as he is, he wouldn't be able to do that.
That's exactly right. Well, Chris, this has just been fantastic. And I'm very appreciative because this podcast applies to every person. I don't care if you're 13 or 30 or 63 or whatever. All of us need to be wise, prepared, and trained to respond to the things of life going around. And so this is just outstanding.
Mm-hmm.
And let me ask, everybody that's listening, sometimes we can get great information that doesn't translate to action. And, I talk about this all the time in our weapons training program. I can train you grip, stance, side alignment, side picture, trigger press all day long. But if you don't take those elements, put them together,
Mm-hmm.
and practice them over and over. I've heard some stats that in order to create a muscle memory, it takes 1,000 repetitions. So how much more so for important stuff that we've heard today? This is
Yeah.
life training.
It is, and I would encourage people not to get too discouraged, because I mean, there could be people who are like, "Well, I haven't thought about any of this." Don't get discouraged.
Yeah.
Just start. Folks will come in and like I try to help people with time management, sometimes in dealing with being overwhelmed. And I said, sometimes it's not as important where you start, but it's important that you start.
So good.
And just
Yeah.
start addressing some of this. And like you said, the muscle memory. For years, I was an addiction therapist, and I still do work with some folks with drug and alcohol issues. And of course, relapse into old behavior patterns and going back to using drugs or alcohol is sadly a big part of a lot of people's stories. But the biggest thing to remember is don't give up.
Yeah.
That you increase your chances more and more every time you get back up on it. So let's say, if you're trying to hard, to exercise and, you have a week where you just fall off and you're like, oh, I haven't been in a whole week. Okay, fine. Go now. Get back
Right.
up on it because that habits take time to form, especially good, healthy habits. Bad habits are really easy to form. Super easy,
Yeah. And reinforce.
and reinforce. But don't give up. Just get started on some of this. Have an accountability partner. If you're going to the gym, maybe have somebody that that you go with. Go work out with them. In other areas we need to form habits, just talk to folks and help them encourage you as well. And then you need to be an encourager to others as well.
That's so good. It brings to mind the Chinese proverb, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a first step.
Yep.
And I think we're all there. We all
And that's
want
why
to
you eat an elephant too. You eat an elephant one bite at a time.
That's right. And so, Chris, obviously this is awesome. I'm sure people are going to be blessed by what you shared with them today. How would they reach out to you if they, I know you do online counseling. How would folks get in contact with you?
Well, the way the counseling world works is a therapist has to be licensed in the state where the person is reaching out from. So anybody in New York State, feel free to hop on my website. AndersonMentalHealth.com is my website. You can find me that way. So right now I am just licensed in the state of New York, but that doesn't, but I will say this, Focus on the Family has a great Christian counseling network. So if you are a person of faith and you're looking for somebody that shares your views, you can hop on Focus on the Family's website, and they have a counselor locator where you just type in your area code and how far out you want to search for folks, and they can connect you with folks too through their website. And I'm actually on that site, so if somebody is in this area, and that's where I do get a lot of referrals from them, simply because people say, hey, or they might have heard me on the radio, but they also get on that website and they find me that way.
So it's AndersonMentalHealth.com. Awesome. And folks, I'm going to ask you, obviously my channel is not the most favorite channel by YouTube. And there really is an effort, I think, to suppress conservative voices. It's a real thing. Regularly have folks in the channel come back and say, hey, we've been unsubscribed. We haven't seen any of your stuff. And so let me ask you, please, I mean, this information today is just liquid gold. I mean, I don't know, I listen to a lot of folks. Chris is exceptionally gifted at sharing life training principles. And I hope and pray that you all will like, share, subscribe, hit that notification button so that we can get in the algorithm again. YouTube can't keep you down if you're in the algorithm because of the comments. Also, please comment. I know many of you have wisdom and experience. I love responding to you. I do apologize. I haven't responded to every comment like I normally do, simply because of schedule. I'll be sharing some things we're doing with you in the days ahead. But I
Mhm.
am very grateful to you, Chris. You're an exceptionally gifted man, and I appreciate your time. And folks, I hope and pray this is helpful to you. Like, share,
Mhm.
subscribe, hit that notification button. And until we see you next time, please stay safe out there. God bless you, folks.
Amen.